Good afternoon to you. Mark Sutton with HurricaneTrack.com here. Monday now, the 25th of September, 2023. You know, it's been very busy. Of course you know. You've been tracking this stuff. It's been very busy since the end of August. And now we're coming up on the end of September. Will it remain as busy? How will September come to an end tropics-wise? And then what do we look for as we get into October? We'll take a look at that. Some statistics on how the hurricane season has gone as a whole. We'll look at sea surface temperature anomalies and how the hurricanes that we have had have been redistributing that heat a little bit. And then we're going to end things. We'll look at some current event stuff too, what's happening out there right now, and then a forecast peek into the future via the GFS. But then we're going to end with a little bit of a lesson on storm surge. Why did we get the surge that we did in Washington, North Carolina, as well as down in New Bern? Our remote cams doing their jobs again, capturing things from a very unique perspective, helping us to learn how the surge does what it does. So we'll take a look at that as we wrap things up. All right, thanks for joining me. Let's first start off over here. I've shown this recently. I like this. It's like a little scorecard, quite literally, of how the hurricane season has evolved. We're up to 17 storms. Remember, we had the one in January that was unnamed, so we're just going to call it 17 storms so far. 16 of them got a name, but whatever. We've had 6 hurricanes. Ophelia arguably could have been a hurricane. They may go back and look at some data. I know they'll look at it, but they may revise it upward in the postseason when they have more time to look at data. So we'll see. But right now, officially, operationally, whatever you want to call it, we're standing at 6 hurricanes, and we've had 25 days with hurricanes so far. The normal is 18. We've had 3 major hurricanes, and we're above the normal on that, and a little bit above the normal on the major hurricane days. And, of course, these are days where we had hurricanes or major hurricanes. And then the ACE score, the accumulated cyclone energy, quite a bit above where we should be. Normally we'd be at 87. We're at 119 right now. Remember one of the other days ago, I said I think we could easily end up with an ACE of about 200. Easy for me to make that prediction once things are already going, right? But I think we could have a big enough October, hint, hint, coming up, that we get 80 more ACE points and end close to 200 for the year. We might even run out of names. The list of names only has 21 letters out of 26. QUXYZ not used. I don't know exactly why, not my department, but we are already up now to Philippe, and that only leaves a few more, and then we exhaust the list of names. That might happen because, well, I'll show you. Let's just move forward, and I shall explain. All right, let's get to it. This is a big reason why we still have very warm water temperatures here in the main development region, into the Caribbean and the Gulf, relative to average and in reality. So the water temperatures are warmer than they should be, and also still sufficiently warm enough for activity to get going and sustain itself. But look over here in the West Atlantic, especially up here in the subtropics, a lot of chiseling away at the anomalies over here. These are all due to the different hurricanes we've had, this as well, and even up through here. Not a lot of heat kind of taken out of the deep tropics because, A, it's still pretty deep. That warm water, the upper ocean heat content is pretty sufficient, and the hurricanes have been moving on through, and except for Lee, which reached peak intensity out here, the hurricanes have been strongest up in the northern latitudes. And even with the activity that we have had, boy, it is still very warm relative to average south of 20 degrees north latitude. And of course, the Caribbean and the Gulf also exceptionally warm in the face of the El Nino that is still prevalent out here. And it just looks like overall the pattern will keep things fairly busy as we end September. No threats to land areas right now, so go ahead and jump to that and make that very known. We got a little bit of activity out in the open Atlantic right now, which we'll talk about in a minute. No threats to land in the next several days for sure. But once we get into October, we really start to watch this area of the Atlantic basin more and more, especially for the Central American gyre that can sometimes set up, that gives us this basically like a corkscrew-looking grapevine is a good way to put it. It's just this large area of energy is a good way to put it, where you get these systems that develop off of it. Michael in 2018, Idalia this year was an August version of the Central American gyre. We got to watch for that. That's typically late September and into October. And then any of these tropical waves that come off and don't develop out here, they can end up in the western part of the basin, and they can flourish when they find favorable conditions there. And then, of course, you've got the random stalled fronts or other disturbances that can be focusing mechanisms to try to get development. And that is exactly what we're seeing right here, a trough of low pressure. Just a focal point along a horizontal plane, if you will. It's not bundled. We talk about that when we look at the vorticity signature. Well, the trough of low pressure, a couple hundred miles long or whatever it is, and disorganized in this particular situation, but it's a focal point, and when upper level winds allow, they can focus more, these troughs, and you can get development. But in this case, the experts, all of us, 90% sure that's not going to happen. That's a good way to put it. 10% that it could, 90% that it probably won't. Then, of course, we do have Philippe out here. It is dealing with some strong upper level winds. The pattern across this area of the Atlantic Basin has changed recently, so it is not as favorable right now with the upper level wind profile. But these tropical waves have been coming off. We've got Philippe. We've got this next one that is trying to get going. This is 91L, or AL91 as it is officially known, and it is forecast to go on to develop. Wait until I show you. I think you're going to get a chuckle out of what happens with Philippe in this next system, which would be Rina, R-I-N-A. It replaced Rita, which made landfall around this date back in 2005 over on the upper Texas coast. I was there for Rita. Will Rina amount to anything when it develops? Well, I'll show you. I think it's going to at least be entertaining to watch, and I'll explain further as we progress. It's going to do a very interesting thing out here in the Atlantic, potentially. You never know for sure, right? Because it is still far enough out in time. Nevertheless, our little trough of low pressure sitting in here, another disturbance, some energy moving in from the Caribbean. All of this might try to pile up and create something short-lived, that might become a depression. I've been looking at the modeling. I'll show you in a minute on the GFS. But nothing too concerning because, again, upper-level winds are just not really favorable right now. But the big thing to remember, look at Jamaica down here, the Caymans. This looks pretty stormy, right? So whether or not it's organized into a depression or a named storm doesn't really matter in terms of heavy rain, the impacts from that. Cruise ships still going down here, right? It's cruise ship season, and these big weather disturbances can cause issues, even if they are not an invest area or a depression or a named storm or a hurricane. So just keep that in mind if you're heading down there, especially. People that live down there, they know, and I hear from them often across social media, which is always great. But yeah, there is some disturbed weather. We'll watch it. And over the coming week or so, something might try to pop down there, but again, nothing that I am too concerned with. The leftovers of Ophelia sitting up here somewhere, and you got the jet up here, the strong westerlies coming along. Got a trailing cold front over here, and some minor disturbed weather south and east of Bermuda, nothing organized with that. Then you've got Philippe over here with the low-level circulation fully exposed. The deep thunderstorm activity removed to the east. We call that shear. And then our other system, 91L, trying to get going somewhere in this mess in the southeastern tropical Atlantic. Now, what does it all look like on the old GFS? Well, this is very helpful because we can pick things out. There's the surface trough right there. And we talk about the surface, 5,000 feet, which is 850 millibars. That's close enough. It's not right at the surface, but the lower part of the atmosphere, there's that surface trough in the Gulf of Mexico. There is Philippe, and there's that energy with that tropical wave, 91L. And then that would be the remnant vorticity signature of Ophelia, still plaguing, I guess we can use that word, right? A descriptive enough way to put it. because it is rather murky up there and cloudy and rainy and cool. So plaguing New Jersey with that system there, the leftovers of Ophelia. So let's put all this into motion. 24 hours out, the surface trough, you notice there, moves on up through the Gulf, and it really doesn't do much at all, so no worries there. What about the next 24 hours? Now we're at 48 hours out, so this is Wednesday morning. And then finally, Thursday morning, and this is what I was talking about. A little bit of energy tries to get going and tucked in here to the Gulf of Honduras, east of Belize. And we'll watch and see what happens with this. There's Philippe. And then there's this next system trying to get going, and then another tropical wave coming off. So yeah, we're right at the last 2 days of September here. This is the 28th, closing out the month. We see what happens going on to Friday morning. And a very small, this is what I mean. Sometimes these little guys can sneak in there and try to pop up. Wouldn't surprise me if that happens, but even if it's nothing that gets a name as we talk about, you can see that little impulse down there. That is going to bring some inclement weather, squally conditions, heavy rain to Belize, the Yucatan, and that area. Now we're up to Saturday morning, and let's just scooch this out to Sunday, and then finally Monday, a week out, and you can see what I was telling you there, this interesting dance between Philippe and Rena, assuming it gets named, right? So let's back it up and see how that evolves. There's Philippe there. There's what would be Rena. Philippe slows down. Rena pinwheels around it, and they just kind of do that interesting little dance. And people have often asked me over the years, hey, can one system absorb the other one and then become like a super hurricane or whatever? No, that doesn't happen, not on this planet. Sometimes the energy gets absorbed and then the other one can go off and become stronger later, but not because it ate the energy from the other system, so to speak. It just doesn't work that way. There's only so much energy available, and usually the two systems impede each other, kind of like if you've ever seen two very hungry puppies or whatever, or you get a little plate of tuna and you got a couple cats and they both go at that tuna. It's not a good sight, right? They both try to fight each other and see which one can get the most of that food. Same kind of thing out here. There's only so much energy to go around, so the systems don't usually collide so much as they rotate around each other, and we call that the Fujiwara effect. If this does in fact look like it's going to happen, we will talk about it more. I'll break out the Wikipedia definitions and we'll go down the educational road there if need be. But that's about 7 to 8 days out. Could be pretty interesting. Yes, there's all kinds of shenanigans that keep trying to pop up off the southeast coast over the next week or so as different impulses seem to get trapped over here in the western Atlantic. But the big thing is nothing particularly organized, nothing intense, nothing that should be very windy and cause any kind of coastal flooding. Just an unsettled pattern as we move further and further into fall. Fall started the other day, technically, whatever you call it on the calendar. So not a real bad way, if you will, to end September. Nothing pressing. And there we are, already out to October 1st and 2nd there. Now we do, like I said, need to watch this area as we get deeper into October, but nothing over the next week to worry about at all. All right? So, a couple of little lessons for you here. During Ophelia, we had several camera systems. I worked with longtime friend and colleague Jesse Bass to put camera systems, I say stuff, in New Bern, along the Outer Banks of North Carolina, Kitty Hawk down to Rodanthe. And initially, my thought was the Outer Banks would see the most impacts there along the ocean with the onshore flow. It looked pretty stiff and pretty pronounced, but then Ophelia sort of contracted its wind field, became more organized and tropical, and made landfall, as we know, near Emerald Isle, North Carolina. So the flow became, again, more concentrated. It was still windy out on the Outer Banks, but it wasn't as windy as if the system was more subtropical and spread out. And that was mentioned as possibly being the case in some of the Hurricane Center discussions. And so, Washington, North Carolina, and New Bern, which are all up at the heads of these rivers there, Washington being the Pamlico River and New Bern along the Neuse and the Trent rivers, they got sizable storm surges. mostly in Washington. So this is what I want to show you real quick. Get rid of me, and let's put this into play mode. This is a time lapse of Washington down at the waterfront. This is the marina there. And this is Saturday morning. That's the Pamlico River. And watch what happens here. The water comes up fairly quickly. We're only talking about a couple of hours here that the water rose several feet and flooded the area. I saw some drone footage that somebody posted. I had a drone battery that only had like 5 minutes on it, and I was over a little bit east of where this is, where it had flooded a neighborhood, and I flew the drone a little bit on that street. But the footage I saw from someone else, I think I saw it on Fox Weather, captured this from the air, and it was pretty remarkable to see. Now, why did it do this? I just liked when we can unpack things and explain why we saw what we saw. First, the center of Ophelia, of course, made landfall through here, went up near New Bern, and just kind of tracked up this way, roughly. And since it was more compact, that easterly and southeasterly flow that came in this way across the Pamlico Sound first pushed all that water towards the Pamlico River up here and into the Neuse River, which turns and heads up towards New Bern. But it really got focused the best in Washington just because of the direction of the wind flow through here. And then as Ophelia tracked by pretty close to Greenville, and they had some significant flooding there too from rainfall, and maybe even a little bit of the push of water all the way up into Greenville from the Pamlico River. It can do that. That's why we saw the flooding in Washington. It had a lot to do with the direction of the wind. So had Ophelia come up this way and put Washington on the west side, we wouldn't have seen it. And it would have been more dramatic, maybe in places like Belhaven or elsewhere. So really, really underscoring again that the track makes all the difference in the world. We've seen that before with hurricanes in the past. We think back to Michael in 2018, as bad as that was, and it was devastating, of course, for Mexico Beach. Had the track been 10 miles to the west, where the center came in just west of Panama City, and I mean like literally a mile or two just west, then Panama City would have had that right front quadrant and the very, very bad core of Michael, and Mexico Beach would have had less storm surge. And you can play that game with any type of system. You move the track just a little bit, and you change the outcome dramatically. Of course, last year, coming up on 1 year since Ian, you move its track a little bit more north, and you bring that massive surge into Tampa Bay or Sarasota instead of Fort Myers and Fort Myers Beach. Same kind of thing here in North Carolina. And just one more aspect to this. In 2018, speaking of that year, Florence came in, and it made landfall down here perpendicular to the coast, and it made landfall, went right over my house, the eye did, here in Wilmington. But that giant circulation of the much larger hurricane, Category 1 at landfall, pushed all of the ocean water, the sounds and everything into the land areas over here in New Bern, where we had a camera for Florence recorded around an 11-foot storm surge. So the track, the direction of the wind, and where the towns and everything are located in relation to all of that on these bodies of water, that all matters. And none of that can be pinpointed even 6 hours before landfall to exactly where these effects will occur. That's why storm surge watches and warnings, other warnings, hurricane warnings, tropical storm warnings, whatever the case may be, covers a pretty big geographic area. Because we could never know, even 12 to 24 hours out, that Washington would get a 5-foot surge or whatever it was, and the Outer Banks out here would end up not having much overwash at all. You know, just a couple of days as this thing evolved, that's where I thought the biggest impacts would be. It ended up being inland, if you will, from the coast by more than 100 miles. So there you go, your little bit of a lesson there on how impacts end up being the impacts that we see and experience in real life. All right, that is it for me for today. Let's drop this on the YouTubes for you. And I post these on Patreon. By the way, our Patreon has grown again this year, and it is now available to join for free, and then you can upgrade to a supporting funding role whenever you like. I love that. I think it's nice to just grow it. We can have a nice community there, and then when people are interested in funding a particular mission or getting involved that way, they can, and they don't have to just drop off when their budget or their needs no longer require that. So patreon.com/HurricaneTrack. I do post these videos there because Patreon now has embedded video capability. Hip, hip, hooray. I love it. All kinds of good things they're doing there. And, of course, this is on YouTube, which is where a majority of you watch, and I do appreciate that. All right, so let me get it on for you. I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. From all of us here at the site, at the back-end team, all of us, we appreciate you tuning in. I'll be back with more for you tomorrow.